A big thank you to SAAL Digital for sponsoring this week's video. Check the link in the description of the video to get 50% off on your next photo product. In this week's video, I'm going to show you how you can get near perfect prints when ordering from a website like SAAL Digital. And the information I'm going to share is something you can also use if you're going to print your photos on your own. Printing is for most photographers the final and most rewarding part of this entire process, because that is where we see our final product really come to life. You can choose to print from a website, a third-party company, a lab, or you can choose to print on your own. The benefit of using a lab, unless you have your entire photographic business built up around printing, is that it is generally cheaper not to invest in printing, ink, and paper. On top of that, a lab usually also have many more different finishes to choose from. Finishes is the broad term for type of print, what you're printing on, the technique you're printing with, and whether or not you're putting your print behind glass or not. So in this next segment, I'm going to cover all the mandatory things that you need to take into consideration before you send your photo off to a lab, at the very least, if you want to have a precise print. The first thing to understand is that we can get near perfect prints, but only near perfect. Fact of the matter is, a computer screen is backlit and a paper print is not. So there will always be a slight difference in perception of your final print compared to what you have on your screen. The end. That's just how it is. So the first and most important thing is that you work on a screen that shows at the very least 100% of the sRGB color space. If it doesn't, you're basically working in blind because the display cannot show all the colors that we are photographing. It is generally also better if you have a display that can show 100% ARGB or even more. However, it is not mandatory to do so. I once edited a photo on a display that only showed 72% sRGB colors. So when I took that photo onto my regular display, the photo just looked completely weird. It was magenta and green and just the weirdest colors. So at the very least, have a display that shows 100% sRGB. Here's a diagram where you can see the different color spaces. And as you can see, sRGB is the smallest. As of right now, I work on a MacBook Pro M2 and it shows the color space P3, which is larger than sRGB. It's fairly close to Adobe RGB. I will get back to color spaces in a moment. The next important thing is that you calibrate your screen, and you can use a device like this one here from Data Color. This is the Spider X2 Ultra. However, in my case with the MacBook Pro M2, it was nearly identical to what the Spider came up with for the color profile. So it is actually really well calibrated straight out from the factory. Another thing that's important to mention, if your screen cannot display at the very least the sRGB color space, it doesn't matter if you calibrate your screen. If it can't display the colors, you can calibrate it as much as you want. It will not help you. So the next important thing is that you match the screen brightness to the room brightness that you are setting in and working in. On a day like this where it's cloudy outside, I generally only have half screen brightness. During evening, I actually turn the brightness down, and of course, if it's sunny outside and the sun shines into the room, then I turn up the brightness a little bit. As I'm standing here talking to you, I also have a big LED display straight into my eyes, and that also screws up my side looking at the screen. So be aware of all the different lighting sources, screen brightness, and so forth that comes into your eyes. The thing is, if you're working on a display that is too bright, you may actually end up turning down the brightness of your photo when you're working on it. And that will in turn, of course, end out with a too dark print. So it is super duper important that you not only check your photo during daytime when you've been sitting and editing it, but also during evening, because I promise you there will be a world's difference between them. So a little hack you can say that you can get around this a little bit is to make sure that you edit on a white backdrop in Camera Raw, Lightroom, Photoshop, or whatever else editing app you're using. A white backdrop can be a little bit hard on the eyes, so generally I edit on a dark gray background, but I always make sure to check my photos on a white backdrop. The reason for this is that whiteness will be your 100% white or your white point in your photo. And relative to the brightness of your screen, your photo cannot be brighter than that whiteness in the background. You will perceive the photo proper compared to a print if you add like a white border to the print or you hang your print on a white wall. It can also be beneficial to check your photo with a black background just to see if you are using the entire dynamic range of the histogram. It is of course a creative decision whether you do or not, but definitely make sure to check it on a white background. Some photographers recommend to up the exposure of your photo a little bit before sending it off to print. And this is to compensate for the lack of backlight on your display relative to when you get it printed. Working on a white backdrop should compensate a little bit for that lack of light. Another important thing is, of course, also that you need a pro printer. You cannot just use the cheapest inkjet printer that you find for $50 down in your local hardware store. That's not how it works. You need a proper photography printer. And that is, of course, what companies like SAAL Digital has. And if you want to save a little bit of money on your next print, definitely use the coupon code down in the description of this video. You can actually get entire 50% off any product from SAAL Digital. Depending on the product, that can be several $100s. Metal prints, fine art prints, regular prints, photography books, and much more, all with different finishes. Later in this video, I'll talk more about some prints I got made from SAAL, and then you can see some of the different types of paper. Be sure to use the link in the description of the video to get your discount. So let's talk a little bit more about color spaces. Here you can see a comparison between sRGB, Adobe RGB, also known as ARGB, and something like ProPhoto. And although yes, you can get a wider color space with other profiles than sRGB, examples like this one is hugely misleading because no, your photo will not get washed out like this if you use sRGB. That's not how color spaces work. My color workflow when editing my photos is that I always use Camera Raw, and Camera Raw displays ProPhoto RGB. And Lightroom does exactly the same because Lightroom is built on Camera Raw. From Camera Raw, when I export to Photoshop, I always make sure to choose Rec 2020, RAC 2020. That's quite a broad color profile as ProPhoto RGB, and I do this to future-proof my photos. But the most important thing is that I choose 16-bit, not 8-bit. Using 16-bit gives me a wider range of colors than 8-bit, and I can avoid something like banding. Super important to edit your photos in 16-bit when you're shooting RAW. When I finish up my editing in Photoshop, I save it as a PSB or PSD file, and from there I convert it to a high-res JPEG file, and I convert it to sRGB. The reason why I convert my photos to sRGB is that sRGB is the only color profile that browsers and Instagram, Facebook, apps and so forth can show. So if you're using a wider color range than sRGB and uploaded it to the web, then the browser will have to interpret that photo in the sRGB color spectrum. However, if many of your most vibrant colors are outside the sRGB color spectrum, they're simply just not displayed. And this means in turn that your photo will look desaturated if you're exporting it as, let's say, a ProPhoto RGB. So always convert to sRGB if your photo is going on the web. That is extremely important. Now printers can show the wider color spaces, and that is why you may want to use ProPhoto RGB, ARGB, Rec 2020, or a wider color space than sRGB. So I'm just going to show you a few different examples where I have a Rec 2020 and an sRGB photo, and we can compare them and you can see the difference, which is absolutely negligible, if there's even a difference at all. So here's a photo I've worked on from Patagonia, and I have converted this to a JPEG sRGB color space. You can see it down here. And now I'm going to change it to a photo that has the Rec 2020 color space. And this is here. You cannot see a difference between these two photos. Now we do know that the difference between the Rec 2020 color space and the sRGB color space is mainly in the green channel. So I've of course made the same experiment with a photo that have more greens in it. Again, we cannot see the difference. Even if I go up and show you a photo with only greens in them, you cannot see the difference. At the very least, I cannot see the difference. The reason why you cannot see a difference is that more colors or more hues is not the same as more saturation. The sRGB color space can easily display 100% black, 100% white, and 100% saturation of all the different hues, all the different colors. What a wider color space gives you is more colors between the extremes. It's more variations of, let's say, green or yellow or red. So when you ask your photo converter to convert a photo from the color profile Rec 2020 to sRGB, you are telling it to convert a specific color that you can see in the Rec 2020 color spectrum to the closest color in the sRGB color spectrum. So you will maybe get the slightest variation from the Rec 2020 to the sRGB. And that is why you probably cannot perceive a difference between the color spaces. So just to show, if you want a more colored photo, a more vibrant photo, it has nothing to do with the color space. You can see here, again, I have an sRGB photo, and then I have my Rec 2020 photo. The difference is that the sRGB photo, I have simply just upped the saturation ever so slightly, and you can see especially the blues, but also some of the reds, are a little bit more saturated, especially the blues, than the Rec 2020. So in conclusion, it will make a much bigger perceivable difference how much saturation or vibrance you add to your photos in Lightroom or Photoshop than what color space you're working in. However, if you're still in doubt, try get a test print of the same photo made from an sRGB file and whatever else broader color space you want to try out. It doesn't have to be the biggest print in the world. Just see if you can actually see a difference. And then make your choice for the final print based on the test prints. So that is why when I print my photos, I always just go for the high quality JPEG in the sRGB color space. The same file that I upload to the web. It's my final file. I know that I can see all the colors in that photo because the sRGB color space is within the P3 color space that my display can show. Because you also have to take into consideration that if you are working on a photo in the Pro Photo color space on a display that cannot show it, but only the P3 color space, then you may actually end up in print with a photo that has a slight variation of colors too. The point is simply just to be consistent through your workflow. If you choose to work in the sRGB color spectrum, you will be more than fine in 99.99% of the circumstances. I promise you. And I know this can be a little bit of a controversial statement, and the super pro photographers and expert printers will probably crucify me for saying that I'm not exporting in a TIFF in the Pro Photo RGB color space. But we have to be a little bit pragmatic. If you cannot see the difference, then it's not worth going through all that hassle with TIFF files. And again, remember, no matter if you chose Pro Photo or a TIFF file or the best quality photo file ever and you printed it, there will still be a slight perceptual difference between what you see on your computer screen and what you get out as a print. So before we head on to the creative choices you have to make regarding printing, it is also important to know about composing your photos. If you struggle with composition in landscape photography, be sure to get my ebook on exactly that topic. The text is minimal and there are loads of examples as for you to get to the point fast. I have a follow-up you can get with even more compositional tools if you want to learn even more. There are links to both of them down in the description of the video. So let's get into some of the more creative decisions that you need to make in regard to your photo, and that is all about the different finishes. So let's start talking about aspect ratios, and this is also a subjective thing. My good friend and colleague Nigel Danson, he always cropped the photo to the aspect ratio that he finds to be the best for the photo in and of itself. But I personally hate that the aspect ratios between the photo, the passepartout, that would be like the white border if you choose to have that, and the frame does not match. I can live with a little bit more space on the underside, but generally I want it to match. This is also generally the reason why I always compose my photos based on the traditional aspect ratios. 3:2, 5:4, 4:3, 16:9, 2:1, and the equivalent vertical versions. And I would argue that there are plenty of aspect ratios to choose from to make most scenes fit. In that way, most frames that you can buy in stores also fits your photos. So should you choose glass or not? Personally, I generally prefer not to have my photos behind glass unless it is glass where the reflection is limited. And that kind of glass does exist. The thing is that you simply just get a lot of reflections in that glass, and that of course takes away from your print. I generally prefer to get my photos printed on paper or on metal. I avoid canvas prints like the pest unless the customer specifically asks for it. There are a lot of non-photographers out there who thinks that a photo should look like a painting and that it ups the quality, so that is why they want it printed on canvas. Generally, I find that canvas prints looks cheap. You can add a frame around it to up the quality a little bit, but generally I do not like them. When it comes to framing, I generally find that I try to match the type of frame with what's on the photo. So if I have a darker photo, I go for a darker frame. If I have a brighter photo, I go for a brighter frame, like the one you can see here in the background. If I have a woodland photo, I generally go for an oak frame. Now, this also has to match with the rest of my interior. Here in my living room, I generally have bright wood or black metal frames and an overall bright feeling. Whereas in my bedroom, I still have my white walls, but both my bed and my drawers are of darker wood, so that is why I preferred dark frames on these photos right here. If you are to hang photos next to each other, you would probably also prefer that they have the same color frame. So again, it's completely down to you and it is very subjective. If you're in doubt about what kind of paper you want to print on, I would recommend that you get a paper sample pack. Some printing companies do offer that. And if you're still in doubt and you're going to make smaller prints like this one here, which are relatively cheap, I'd recommend to just try different papers, like get it printed 3 times on different papers and see which one you like the most. I'm sure it will not ruin you. If you have done everything what I've mentioned so far, you are next to nearly there in getting the perfect print. However, if you want to put the dot over the I, we need to look at ICC profiles. ICC profiles are files that you can install into Lightroom or Photoshop that are supposed to make Photoshop or Lightroom simulate how your final print will look like if you print on the specific paper that the ICC profile is made for. You simply just install the profile, go and select it based on the information that you get on the printing website. So you make sure that you tick the right boxes. And then you go and choose proof colors. From here, you can edit your photo back to how it looked before proof colors was put on. What I do in Photoshop is that I make a copy of my photo where I have not proof colors put on. And then on the other photo where I have proof colors on, I edit the photo to look as close to the one where proof colors is not on. And from there, theoretically, I should get a near perfect print when I send it off to SAAL Digital. If your printing website does not offer ICC profiles, I would probably find another place to get my photos printed. I would also highly recommend that you read through the website's guide on how to get proper prints and proof your colors. It takes a little bit of while, but once you understand it, it's actually quite simple. And if you want to learn more about editing photos, you can do so with my 30+ videos post-processing course. It's in this course I share not just my workflow, but all my techniques on how I edit my photos, my philosophy about how to edit them, including how I want to respect the light. There is a discount code and a link down in the description of this video. However, let's look at some prints. So we're going to look at a few photos that I've got printed through SAAL Digital, and I'm going to display the name of the paper just down here. The first pair here is obviously the same photo, one where I've used the ICC profile to correct it, and one where I have not used the ICC profile. The reason why I chose this paper to show the difference between an ICC profile corrected photo and not is because the ICC profile, when I loaded it into Photoshop, showed quite a significant difference. However, when you look at it like this, there's honestly not a big difference. So the one I've corrected is this one here. It is less saturated because I wanted less saturation in the foreground. However, simply just because that this photo here is a little bit brighter, it is also a little bit more saturated over here because I have not corrected for that saturation. I gotta admit, I actually prefer the print that is not corrected. That said, even though there was a big difference when I looked at these photos through Photoshop, looking at them here, the difference is minuscule, although there. The same is the case with these two photos here. This one is the one I corrected in Photoshop. You can see it is less blue in the clouds than this one over here. It's simply just more saturated. And again, that is personal preference, what you like. That said, I think I actually prefer this one here because it is slightly brighter. And that is why I think it's very important that no matter if you use ICC profiles or not, and if you are going to print large, make sure that you make test prints, smaller test prints on the same type of paper before you commit to buying a big print. And like the previous photo, if I didn't have a chance to compare them side by side like this, I would probably not think that this photo here was one I preferred less than this photo over here. One other thing is that I did not up the exposure of these two photos with 1/2 to 1 stop. And as you can see, they're probably a little bit on the dark side. So it's definitely something you need to consider doing. And remember, you can get 50% off at SAAL Digital on your next photography product via the link down in the description of this video. So here I have the same photo on 3 different types of paper. I'll write the name right here and here and here. And I have not used the ICC profile to correct for any differences in this paper. It's simply just to see the difference in the paper. You should also be able to see that the blacks are deeper and generally the colors maybe pop a little bit more on the right-hand photo. The lower photo here, you can see that the blacks are crushed, which means that they are not 100% black. And likewise, in the photo here, you can see if I take this print up here, it actually has a little bit of an uneven surface. Personally, this kind of uneven surface is not something I actually particularly like. I want it to be more uneven and not lines like this. This photo here is completely flat and it's actually really nice quality. It feels good touching it. But as you can see, the colors and the shadows are a little bit crushed here compared to this one, which I think you would define as one that is semi-gloss. That is also a rule of thumb. If you have a photo that shows many colors or saturated colors, generally glossy paper is preferable. Whereas if you have less colored photos, woodland photos, maybe you want something that is a little bit more fine artsy. I actually also have a larger print right here, a more fine artsy print. And here you can definitely feel the surface even more. You can even see that it's uneven. And personally, I really, really like this. And the colors are really nice in this one too. A little bit better than in this one, but not entirely as good as in this one. That said, it is very different pieces of paper that I print on, and that means that it is a creative decision which kind of paper that you choose. Here I have a couple more fine artsy photos on that same kind of paper, and I think they just look spectacular. I really, really like what I see here. This one is maybe slightly to the dark side. And when I look on the back of my screen up here on this camera, it does look a little bit more saturated than what I see here. But to my eyes right here, this looks really, really nice. I just so love the composition of this one here with myself standing, looking out into this epic but moody weather. Have the birds up here and how I have balanced the photo and have it time blended with all the waves coming in right here. I think it just looks spectacular. And obviously, if you want to learn more about composition or how I edit my photos, you can use the links down in the description of this video for my ebooks and for my Photoshop course. I also got a big print of this photo here made, and as you can see, it looks absolutely gorgeous. In this case here, I used the ICC profile, but I actually decided to make the photo slightly brighter also. And I think that turned out really well because I can see almost into the shadows down here of the boat, and the birds also have some details in them. So should you use ICC profiles or not, that is entirely up to yourself. In the end, as you can see, printing is somewhat of a creative decision making. But if you followed the tips that I've showed in this video, you should get next to nearly perfect prints when you send them off to a lab. I hope you learned a lot. Be sure to use the links down in the description of this video to get 50% off at SAAL Digital. And if you want to learn more about composition or editing, I have my educational content down there too.